All right. So basic search, this is the main thing we're going to do. Like I say, in Boss of the Sock, this is all we're using. In the official Splunk training materials, you go into more features of Splunk. But anyway, so you can type a search in here. Splunk is called Google for log data for a good reason. You can just type in a word and search for it, and it will search for that word in the logs. So, right, you can, and it will try to give you. It'll fill in text for you. So first two letters, you can choose something off a list as opposed to typing it all. Then you can have a pipe, and you can put in more commands. So if you have failed and then pipe, you can choose an option like time chart or chart. If you don't put a pipe and a word here, you'll just see a list of events that match that term. If you put in a pipe, you can then have a term here to do some kind of summary or processing on the data. For example, down here you can do a count. You can do a count by host, count by IP, count by user, that sort of thing. All right. Yeah.
Are those functions sort of similar to what you can do in SQL and in Excel? They're
Absolutely.
So one of the things I was doing outside of class was trying to find kind of like a pattern list of like common commands and things like that. Do you generally advocate when thinking about queries to try to think about them as if you were thinking about them like a certain SQL query or not?
Sure, that's exactly what they are. Okay. It's running, Splunk just wrote their own version of SQL called KQL or something, and it is just SQL running behind the list. So if you have any familiarity with any other database function, it's the same.
So I'm just answering my own question. Yeah. So things like select and then I'm assuming you can.
Well, select is implied here.
Right.
But yeah, it is essentially the same. Yeah, and I think.
Then can you also do things like join queries and things like that, like make something slightly complicated to exclude data or not?
Well, as far as I know, I haven't done any of them because the data is automatically ingested, and they do whatever. Breaking into tables and joining them, that happens behind the scenes.
Right, so you don't have to do that extra legwork.
Well, you don't have to. There might be some conditions under which you might want to, but as far as I can tell, I just let the software do that behind the scenes.
Okay.
And that's been good enough. But it does have an option to just type in a query in case you want to do something complicated. Anyway, so the search assistant is enabled by default, so that's giving us these tabs. You can turn them off. And like I say, here's the editor. The SPL editor, the advanced editor is what we have. That does this. But there is a way to get, I think, to the KQL, the query language itself.
And you find that in the preferences, it looks like?
Yeah, but this is still just the auto-formatting and line numbers and search syntax. There is some way to actually make your own queries, but I never ever used it. So, all right. So here's your search query with failed chart count. Here's command history and such. There's quite a few options here to tell you about the queries you do.
How far back does the history go?
Pretty far. That's why actually my shared servers, like the Boss of the Sock server, you'll see it seems to go back like at least 20 or 30 queries and maybe longer than that.
Does it have its own cache? It's not dependent on the browser or...
Right, it's really on the server. It's not in the browser. Yeah. So, and you can, of course, use parentheses, just like anything else. You can have index equals sales or index equals web. The or has to be capital letters, and it will typically turn orange to tell you got it right. This is a very common mistake. You put in or and in lowercase letters, and then it does not take the logical effect. Instead, it's going to look for the word or and in the log. So that's something to know. And so when you're done and click search, it'll start popping up results. And as you've seen, it can take a while, and then you'll get always reverse chronological order with the newest ones on top, because that's typically what you want, although you can choose to sort by something else. And this timeline bar we looked at before gives you a sort of graph of how many events there are at various times, and you can click on this bar to zoom into a limited area of time if you want to. And down here, I searched for failed password, and so it highlights every occurrence of that string. So you can easily see what part of this detected the search field. So it picks them up in individual events, gets the time. Every event has to have a time, and then it assigns any other metadata like timestamp, host, source type, and index. And you have fields over here that are easy for you to get to by clicking on them. All right, so you can view your search results. This tells you how many results were found. Yeah.
So the fields that are listed over here, those are all common fields for just basically server traffic exchange of information.
Well,
so even though I don't necessarily understand what
Well, you'll learn them.
@1 means.
Well, yeah, what happens here is there are fields that have been chosen by the user, and it pre-populates it with fields that are always there, like time and source type.
Sure.
And then you can choose to put other fields up here and selected. And then it determines interesting fields are fields that appear in, I think, like more than 80% of the events or something like that. It chooses fields that seem to be useful and just
So
lists
there's
them
a
here.
threshold that it sets there.
Yeah.
And then the number, I know I asked about the letter
Yeah.
last week. You said you didn't know, so I'll leave that alone.
What was the letter?
But
Oh,
see, it says A, and then hashtag at the bottom.
at the
You go back
bottom.
over those list of sources, or fields, sorry.
A.
See, A on the left, A on app, and then it says hashtag.
Oh, that. Oh, yeah, I don't know what that means.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so-
I think it probably means this is an alphabetical field, not a numerical field.
That would make sense.
Yeah.
And then what is the number at the end of each one?
That
of
is
those?
how many different types, different values of this field exist. So there is something named action, but it always has the same value,
Okay, so it's
Then there's
not
something named-
instances,
yeah.
it's the different
number of values.
options of
Yeah.
hosts, different options of source, different
Just,
options of source.
no, just
type.
different values of that field. So the records have a thing called action, but they're all the same. So the field is there, but it's not going to help you narrow down the search.
Okay.
This one, on the other hand, would. There's date, hour, there's 20 different values of that. So if you click on that, it'll show you the 20 values, and you then might be able to narrow your search if you can choose only one of these that's relevant.
So that's really to show you that a refined sort of aspect of your search that, like, if you're trying to find variables within an instance of a field,
Yep.
source is probably going to have a couple, host is going to have a couple, source type isn't.
These all go together pretty much, like we've seen.
So you would just use that to narrow your focus on where you're going to look for different events.
You might. Yeah, it depends on what you're looking for. Yeah, exactly. And that's why that normal thing you do is you put in a couple of words, you get too many results, and then you use these to refine
To
it.
narrow it down.
And you scroll down there to see what fields are available and which one of them seem to help you narrow down to what you care about. Yeah. So if you hover over anything down here, it will give you the options to add that to the search, exclude it from the search, or create a new search including only that item. So this is just to help you. You can look through here and decide, well, this failed password isn't really finding what I want. Maybe this other field would help me find what I want. Yeah.
Do key modifiers like control or shift work to sort of select multiples of those in the field, or do you have to
No, I think you can only have one of these.
you have to go one at a time?
Yes, I think only one of these would make sense at a time. Yeah. All right, and so you got view options. I mentioned this before. There's raw, list, and table. And so this is list, the most common one, where you get a summary here. And here's table, where it breaks them out into a vertical list, and you press this, it'll sort of fill the whole screen with a separate line for every field. And then raw is just the raw data, just a line of data, unparsed. So those are just different ways to view the events.
No, we talked about
fine.
last week that raw
Yeah.
gives you like the string of everything except the actual data in the code packet that's being called or exchanged.
Well, it gives you everything that was in the log item. And when you're logging network data, it does not take the whole packet. It only takes a summary, like a source address, IP address, time, total number of bytes transferred. And that's normal, because otherwise it would make a whole ton of data. Now, there are people that record whole data packets as part of network monitoring, but they don't use Splunk on that. All right, and so then you can select the time. We've done this before. You got preset ranges like all time and stuff, and you can also go and choose like a range from a particular time and a particular day to a closing time. You can specify any time range you like. One thing though is time zones really create a problem, especially if you're a large network crossing many time zones. These times are in the local time of your browser. And very often, for a large network, you just put everything in Zulu, Greenwich Mean Time, and then it's often sort of confusing to type in these times. That's why I found it to be far more effective to find an event and then click on the event and then choose a limited window around that event. Otherwise, you're going to have to try to figure out what time zone is appropriate, and you can easily be off by a number of hours. And that'll come up when we get to the advanced boss of the SOC. There's a time when you have to narrow the thing down to like a 5-second range, and it's very easy to be off by an hour or two and not be able to find the event. Yeah.
Can you toggle between military and just sort of?
As far as I know, you're stuck in this graphical interface with the local time zone of your browser.
Okay.
But there might be a way to set everything in UTC, and that would certainly help.
Got it. So
Yeah.
then what you're advocating is basically if you were looking at the timeline without any times on it,
Yeah.
and you can see these checkpoints, pick a checkpoint,
Yeah.
zero in on that.
That's what I did.
kind
Because,
of-
yeah, when you click on an event, you can then say, give me like plus minus 1 minute, plus minus 10 seconds for this
and
event.
You can see what happened before, and then
Yeah.
if you want, you can even refine or narrow that
Yeah.
time frame.
Yeah, that's the easiest way to make sure you're in the right time. That way you can avoid the time zone question, which otherwise is a problem. And this is true of all network security issues. If you have a large network, there are problems with time zones. Yeah.
So that leads me to another question, and this is probably too detailed, but then
No, it's fine.
once you've identified an event and you're sort of through your investigation,
Yeah.
how do you then bring up the summary of the time correctly? If it's, I mean, at that point you've done enough searching and you can sort of say, okay, well, we know
Right.
it was on this server in France, we know it was on this day, and the time that associates with our time. You've
Yeah,
done so much investigation.
yeah, then you'll make some kind of report, and in that report you'll have to report the time, and you'll probably find a measurement in UTC. Yeah, good. All right, so like I say, you can go down here. Here's your time abbreviations. You can even express it in some kind of alphabetic thing here, like minus 30 minutes rounded off to the nearest hour. I've never used this. I just used a graphical checker where you can fill in a field. In principle, you could type this in, but that's too confusing in my opinion. That graphical thing is much friendlier. You can have earliest and latest specified here.
Yeah, that's all.
That's for real command line jocks that want everything to be typed in your command line, you could do it. But most of us will just use the graphic checker. Yeah.
Sorry, just would
Yeah.
someone like that in the workflow like use that syntax in their notes or something in terms of like tracking what they did?
Well, you could, but it's what you really use in the query. So
Yeah.
if you're making like an automated script to
Right.
run queries and you want everything to just be in the command line, you'd use something like this.
Yeah.
And that's, of course, a big deal. Like I mentioned before, a big thing in the modern networks is DevOps. In the old networks, you had people doing their job and not knowing what other people are doing. So very often, you would do something in a way that's easy for you, that makes it hard for the next guy,
Yeah.
and so everything gets snarled up. And in a modern DevOps shop, everybody has to serve the next person in line as a customer and communicate with them and fix anything you do that makes it harder for other people. And also, everybody is supposed to be a programmer and everybody is supposed to be automating their job so that all the normal workflow just happens automatically. And that's why normally everything goes really smoothly and fast through all the stages of production and testing. And that's, in that case, you would really want to learn how to script everything.
Yeah.
So whatever you do repeatedly, you'd make a script that does it automatically.
Yeah, if you were going to, let's say, populate a huge spreadsheet with a bunch of events that you found and you wanted to
Yeah.
look at the times on 30 minutes before and 30 minutes after, but you have 1,000 events.
That's right. And this is a very common thing. Of course, if you think about the job you typically get in this field, first job you get is a network analyst, a security analyst, and you work the midnight shift. This is the easy job to get because it's not desirable. And what you'll be doing is looking at Splunk or something like it, and it will be popping up alerts. DDoS attack in progress, brute force attack in progress, and you're just like a frontline tech support. You'll have like 10 of these you know what to do about, and anything else you escalate to level 2. And so all the easy things should be automated with some normal script you run whenever this common thing happens. Like, if you're tech support, 90% of your time you're just doing password resets. People are calling in, it's usually a password problem, and you just have a standard procedure to handle a password reset or any other common tech problem like password reset, wrong version, known bug, and anything else you escalate to a level 2. And your goal is to convince the company that you're reliable, you're not a drunk, you're not an idiot, and then after a few months you hope to get escalated to level 2 as you learn more and move up. This is how they screen new employees. They put you on this boring job to see if you're a reasonable employee. And then if you do good work, then you'll quickly learn more and move up to the more interesting level 2 and level 3, where you don't do the routine stuff, you get the trouble cases where you actually have to figure out more complicated problems. And that's typically how you go. So I'm mentioning out this timeline down here, and it'll show you what the scale is, 1 hour per column, and you can click on these to zoom into specific time ranges. All right, and so that's what you have here. You can click and drag to get narrow ranges of time. It doesn't re-execute the search, it just filters the events. So you might have 4,000 events, but after you limit the time, you've only got 97 events and so on. You're looking at a subset of the events that were found previously.
Sorry, Sam, why is
Yeah.
that detail relevant?
Oh, because you might want to know how much server time you're using.
No, I mean, why does it matter that we care about it not re-executing the search?
Yeah, because if, like I say, it can be that in big networks, the server time is in fact expensive and slows things down.
Got it.
And
So
so
it is
you'll,
about resources.
yes, you will try to avoid doing unnecessary extra searches.
Got it.
And that's why one thing I mentioned before that the Splunk experts say is they don't like this. They don't like just putting a word in this field because that's slow. It has to search through the whole log to find that anywhere. What they prefer is like action equals failed password. The name of a field equals value because that's much faster. I do it this way all the time because I'm just a sleazy slob. I'm trying to get the answer, and I'm running my own machine, and I just want to get the answer, like most people. And I don't care about the server time. But if you're in a big company, server time might be at a premium, and then you turn to a more efficient service. The main kind of efficiency I care about is human efficiency, to make it easy for me to get the answer. And that's not a small thing. But at some companies, it's server efficiency that's the limit. So you might, they always want you to be aware how much server time you're consuming.
Well, certainly if you're running thousands of queries every day or hour.
And you have a huge network with an incredible amount of data. Then, it's, however, in general, there's a general rule, by the way. If you're at a small company, like a nonprofit, then they give you really weak computers and the humans have to work a lot harder to make them work. But at large companies that make profit, they have learned it is much better to give your people powerful equipment. Equipment is much cheaper than people. So at big corporations that make money, everything is designed to make it as convenient as possible for you. That's why you would use Splunk. I mean, there are open source products like Security Onion that will do all this for free. It's just really hard to install and really hard to use. So if you have no money at all, then you make your staff work harder and make the resources cheaper. But for-profit companies have learned long ago they'll give you a powerful computer, they will update it frequently, they'll give you the latest version of the best software because humans are the real cost. And you want your staff to be able to get the work done without hitting unnecessary speed bumps, and you want them to be using the standard product that they learned about in school where there's manuals and training and certifications instead of some weird open source thing where when you're in trouble you have to go hunt through forums to find the answer. Anyway, that's an issue. Depends on where you end up in the world. So, all right. So you can adjust the timeline. There are different ways to view it. You can format it, and you can zoom out and zoom in and all that on the timeline. Haven't worried about that too much. All right, so every search is a job. Some searches take a lot of time, and you have to wait for that job to finish. And that's, of course, when you would start trying to rewrite searches to make them use less CPU time. And it will, jobs are available for 10 minutes. So you can actually see what jobs are being processed if your jobs are so slow that you have to start it and then wait and wait and wait for it to finish. And sometimes this happens in this class when like all the students are doing the same project at once on my cloud server. That's why I made 2 of them. If like 10 or 15 students are all trying to do boss of the SOC at once on the same server, then it starts slowing down and you'll look and the other students' queries are in a queue and yours are in a queue. So it can get to the point. And that's because I'm running those on a really weak minimal cloud server. All right. So you got permissions for jobs like private, everyone can access it, and the lifetime, by default, it'll only exist for 10 minutes, but you can extend it to 7 days if you want to. Now, if you want to keep your search results forever, because it's like our annual or weekly report, then you create a report, not a search. And the report can include a search. Yeah.
Just to clarify on live for 10 minutes, does that mean that it will try to complete the job, and then once the job is complete, it sits there in the cache and you can access it because you mentioned that
I think so.
Refine it based on those terms. You're not actually the search. You're just filtering the original search.
Yeah, and so here we have, here's the lifetime. 10 minutes and 7 days, your choices. That's the lifetime. I think after that, it vanishes from the list.
And you would have to rerun the whole search again.
Right. That's why, it's a very good policy to keep a text file with your searches in it. I'm used to this from all these things like SQL injection and all the other hacks. When you're trying to refine a query, keep a text file, keep a copy of your query, especially if anything works. Like this produced some good results. Because very often you have to go back and try a query you tried yesterday or something. And so you want to have your own list of it. Because these histories, you can't trust the history on here to keep your stuff long enough. And it gets mixed up with everybody else's stuff. So Whenever you're doing this kind of work, just copy the query, which is just a line of text.
Yeah, no,
And keep it
when I
around.
was
Yeah.
trying to start the homework, I was taking your advice on that. So that my question sort of extends to then.
Yeah.
You have this query and you're in the midst of running through all of the different fields to try to do your investigation. Let's
Yeah.
say it gets to 9:58 seconds. Does all you're saying, all of that just disappears and you have to start over again?
I'm not sure, actually. We'd have to try it and see. It's a good question, and I don't quite know. Yeah, you know?
That means that we can save the queries and the separate, you know.
Yeah, but I
file
think
for
it means it
every
saves the
single-
running job. So I think the question is, do you want to let a job run for days?
Yeah.
And you probably don't.
Yeah, if it's got like,
That's why I think the default is 10 seconds or something, because 10 minutes. This is an issue. The same thing's true, by the way, of the similar product called Velociraptor, which we're going to use in the incident response class. Velociraptor does queries of your machines on your network to see, you'd use Splunk to find indicators of compromise. Splunk does an investigation, you figure out they got in, they put this malware on there. Now you know this malware creates a file. Now the question, how many machines are infected? Now you could try to find that out in Splunk, but it's a lot better to use Velociraptor. Velociraptor is designed to send queries out to all your machines, requesting information, and then gather all the results. And it's carefully designed that it will never run a query more than like 5 minutes. If it can't get the answer in 5 minutes, it'll terminate, because otherwise you'd burden all your machines with these jobs.
sure.
And so it sends, and also it's asynchronous. It sends out the request like an email, and then it gathers the results as they come in at different times, because of course some of the machines might be slower, some of them might be turned off or off the network right now, and you wouldn't want to wait for that. So it's a asynchronous process.
so when they show up, it'll give you that report when it happened.
That's the idea. And so it's the same kind of thing here. You do, if you start a job, it might end up taking forever, and you might wish you hadn't started it, because it's too complicated and it's going to take like a day, and you don't want to wait a day. So having some kind of limit by default is good.
So I'm sorry, I have to run through a couple scenarios.
Yeah.
So that job that you're talking about has to be a query on an amount of data that we're talking about millions of different results that come in the
Well,
search.
no, you choose, and you might choose something very simple. That's why you try to find indicators of compromise first. I mean, you could try to get all the information from a server, like the whole hard drive or something, and that'd be ridiculous. That'd be way too much data to send over the network and way too much to process at your end. So in incident response, you refine your question. Say, don't give me that, give me all the registry keys created in the last 24 hours.
Right.
Or just the name of every file and its creation date, which is not too big. Something like that. Some reasonable query that will give me a reasonably small amount of data that's useful to me.
So what would be an example then of a job that you would set up that would run for a day?
Oh, it's pretty easy to do. For example, if you use a wildcard, if you're looking for failed passwords and you look for fail star, it's going to look for every log entry that contains the word fail followed by anything, anywhere, especially if you do like star fail star. Now it's got to read through every line of every log entry right from the start to the end, looking for those 4 letters. And if you have a lot of log entries, that could take a really long time. That's why they say writing your query more carefully would help a lot. If you said status equals failed, that would be really fast, because it just looks in one field for one value. But if you put star fail star, that will take much longer.
Right.
And
so that would be an instance maybe where you would say, okay, we're going to set this for 7 days.
Right.
Let it run.
Right.
We'll ask for every 1,000 instance of the event that it finds.
Yeah, I mean, that question, sometimes you really do want to do a huge thing and let it go forever.
Sure, yeah.
But you don't want that to be the default.
No.
That's
I'm
right,
just,
yeah.
I'm
Yeah, that's
I'm
right.
trying to
You're
get
right,
the
but the one you
understanding, like-
described, you would not limit to every thousandth.
Yeah.
You would want the whole thing. Like, for
Really?
example, in an investigation, you might want the whole hard drive. You might want that. If you do, that's going to really burden the end machine, and it's going to take a lot of network and a lot of storage, but you can do it. It is an option. If you decided this investigation, I found the guy that is actually stealing our money, and the guy in our finance office is actually delivering money to foreign agents, and I have to prove it, so I'm going to get all the evidence. I don't tell them anything. I connect over the network and image their machine so they don't even know they're being investigated. But I really need the whole hard drive because I really think something serious and important is bad is happening here, and I need it. There are times when you want that, but you know that's going to take like overnight. And you don't start there. You start with easy, fast things and to zero in on the problem. and then you investigate targeted machines that are really important in such great detail.
So now that we've gone on this tangent, I'm going to
Yeah.
ask this question. We are not going to have to really worry about this limit too much. Because
No, not in
the
this
queries
class.
and
No.
jobs we're setting up are pretty
Yeah,
simple.
we're only doing little things. Yeah,
Got it.
yeah,
Good to know.
good. That's good. Yeah. All right. So there's the various permissions. All right, and so you can share your jobs. So everybody has permissions, and that means so you would set up a query like for your frontline for your analysts. You might have a shared query saying, when you see this kind of attack, run this shared query that we've already written, which will create our standard report. That's the sort of thing you do. Or your weekly progress report, or your sales this week or this month or something. You'd make a query and just save it, and then it's shared, and other people can run it. I used to do this all the time with a much more primitive database called Paradox that I used at a corporation. I would set up queries and then give it to other people. They would just run my queries. I didn't trust them enough to write their own queries, but they could run a shared query and produce a standard report without really too much understanding it. That's common.
How do the queries show up for them? Are they in like a file structure, like a Google Doc structure or something like that?
I'm not sure. It's a good point. You could have the
Next
text.
slide doesn't talk about that?
I don't think so. See, you share. Well, I don't know. You share a job, and then you have a link to the job.
Okay.
So I guess they can just click that link. But exactly how it shows up for them, I don't know. I've done
So
it.
the burden would be on them to put those queries into a text file, like you say, or
Well,
something like that?
I don't know. It's a good question. I'm not sure how you do it in Splunk. I know when I did it, we had a form,
Right.
and I could just give you a button to click,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
a cash register.
Sure.
And there's probably some way to do that here, but I'm not quite sure how you do it.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So you can export your results too. You can just look at them in Splunk, or you can export them as comma-separated value XML or JSON, which is typical. Very often when you have any kind of report of computer activity, you might want to feed it into another program like Excel or something. So you very often want to make a machine-readable version of the data you found.
Wouldn't that just be the example we're talking about right here?
No, that's not the query, that's the
Oh,
results.
I see. Yeah, it's a different button.
Yeah, that's the results. Yeah. And so you can see your saved jobs here, jobs you have run in the last 10 minutes or that you've extended for 7 days. So I'm not sure about the timing. It might not be killing it if it runs more than 10 minutes, but it just removes it if it's been more than 10 minutes. So this is just a limit on the history. That's why you're asking about those differences interesting, and I don't think it's clear in these slides.
And that's under the activity tab up there. Is that
Yeah,
what I'm seeing?
yeah, activity, jobs, you can see them. Yeah, so we can play with it when we get to Boston
Sure,
Sock
yeah,
and see it.
just-
Anyway, you can view your search history. This shows your most recent searches. Here, looks like it apparently keeps them up to 30 days. I know it keeps a lot of them. Just like your browser history seems to keep them approximately forever. All right. And so that's 5, and I think we got to do 5 and 6 today, so I'll just keep going. So 6, fields. Fields are real important. Like I say, you could just search for 404, but it would be better to search for area code equals 404. Then it would be run much faster and be more specific if you know the name of the field. So this is the value equal pair. And if you put multiple things like action equal purpose, status 503, that implies and. Both of these conditions have to be true for an event to be selected. If you want, you can have not, where I want this, but this has to not be true. Just like any kind of advanced, and you can also put in or. So Splunk will discover fields. When you imported the data, it tried to recognize the data type and import the fields, parse it out. So you'll have, you always have time and raw and host source and index and time, but other fields are specified in the format of the data when you import it. And so you might have obvious keys like action equal purpose. Sometimes it's from inside the event status equals 200. You got these various events. Yeah.
And that's designated by the kind of traffic that you're doing. So like,
Well, the kind of log. So if it's a standard log, like a Linux server log, web server log, then it'll recognize it and have standard fields. If you have something you wrote that has a weird log format, then you will have to tell it how to parse it. This is the IP address, this is the name of the machine, this is the date. And if you don't do that, it'll just be a line of unformatted data all in one field, and you won't get much good out of Splunk. You might as well just be using grep at that point. So you got a field sidebar, and this is what we were just talking about. Selected fields you can configure by selecting them. And then there's interesting fields. There it is. They have to occur in at least 20% of the events. That makes them interesting. And you go at the bottom, there's an all fields link. to just see all fields if the field you want doesn't pass one of these tests. So the value is here, the selected field, and the number of different values it has. So, all right, and you can choose, the selected fields are at the top, it starts with these, and you can choose to select any other fields and put them in this list. It's like a favorites to customize it for your situation.
Can you do that in between? They will remain in between jobs?
Yeah. Once you do it, they stay there until you undo it.
Sorry, where did you say that you could?
At the bottom. At the bottom, there's a list, and you can click a field and make it a selected field. Yep. All right, and so, all right, so you can modify selected fields. Like here you go. If you want to make it, if you click this field, like action, then it will pop up a little box here, and now you can do things. You can make it selected. And you can also do things like find the top values or the rare values or events with this field. There are some canned things you might want to do about that field, like the top 10 values. And that's after you make it selected, now it will add it to this list. Just like a browser favorite.
Yeah.
All right, so you make any field selected, of course, and you can, here it is, all fields. So even fields that aren't in 20% of the events, you can find whatever your field you want and then make it selected. So you can see it. All right, and from the field sidebar, like say you can do lots of things, top values, rare values, and so on. If you hit top values, it'll show you the top 10 values, and then you can click on these and it'll say field equals that. So I can see the top 10 values are here, and the one I care about is add to cart. So when I click that, it will add this action equals add to cart to the search. And this is very good because if you type everything in, you might make a typographical mistake. If you avoid typing by selecting with the mouse, then it automatically fills in things. That's often a better way to get started. All right, and so here's using fields. This will just look for that pattern of numbers anywhere. This will be much more efficient. Client IP equals this. The problem, though, is, as you can see when we did Boston to SOC last time, there are a lot of different IP fields. The different log entries that have IP addresses do not all give it the same name. One calls it C_IP, another calls it client IP, another calls it destination IP. And so if you were to specify it this precisely, you might not find all the log entries that matter to you. So that's why the difficulty is not Splunk. The difficulty is your log data, which is not really as clean and organized as it should be. And this is why Google had the problem. How do you search the internet? Things are not organized. There's no format. So you have to somehow index the web first. And that's a big job. They have a data crawler. It kills the first 2,000 characters off every web page. It puts them in a database. It decides how to parse them. And that's really a lot of the work, is to somehow create structured data out of unstructured data. And that's what Splunk is trying to do too. You probably have 100 different logs coming in together, and they're all naming the fields slightly differently. So it's more difficult to write a query than it should be. All right, so but field names are case sensitive and the values are not. So host equals www3 is the same as host equals capital www3, but capital host is not. You'll find 0 events. So that is just there to give you a headache. Yeah.
So I see that we're using numeric strings here with the IP and stuff.
Yeah.
If you were going to use letters, would you be looking? You use quotes.
You can
correct?
put them in, or you can omit them. It seems to take it either way.
Okay.
Can you be pretty friendly in that regard? Oh, by the way, I'm forgetting to check the online people. Let's see if there are questions in the Twitch. Oh, good. Not a lot of them. Okay, good. All right. So, all right. By the way, it does know what IP addresses are. So you can do like a star here. You can put a slash if you know your CIDR notation. That's nice. It's trying to be friendly. So it doesn't just literally match this as a string. It understands this is an IP address. It accepts.
It's in quotes there, though.
Yep, it is, which would give you a headache. I know. That's why, as far as I can tell, the quotes do nothing. You can leave them in or put them in or leave them out, and it has the same effect, which is not normal. Normally, you would think the quotes make it a literal string. But yeah.
So are we? This slide is then saying that those two written queries are identical
Yeah.
as far as Splunk is concerned.
Yeah. Yeah, a thing to know. It's smart. And I would argue, in this case, I'd say it's too smart. I want quotes to mean what I think quotes mean, like they mean in a spreadsheet, but apparently not. Yeah. All right. And so here you can put an or in there and so on. And you can have, you can use wildcards. So user equals star will take any value for user, but the user field has to be present. If there's a log that doesn't even have a user field, it will not satisfy this criteria, which is another thing that's not obvious. All right. And you can, of course, use greater than and less than for numeric fields and so on. All right. And by the way, you can do not equals. So all the things you might want to do, they're pretty much there, of course, because the whole point of this is to make it easy for the end user. So that's, by the way, these are different. Status not equal 200 will return events where the status field exists and the field doesn't equal 200. But if the status field does not exist, it will not satisfy this and the event will not be found. But not status equals 200 will return events where the status field doesn't exist. So that's another little gotcha. These two things are not equivalent, although they look like they should be equivalent. And that, of course, like I mentioned, that's the fundamental problem, is that you have log entries and they're not all with the same layout. So you have this strange problem where some of the events do not have the field you're searching on. Yeah.
So I guess this is, again, too specific of a question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What would be an example where you are looking for a numeric value, you use option 1, but then there might be events that you are interested in that don't have that field?
Oh, it can happen. It can happen really easily. Like you're looking for failed logins because they indicate attackers. So you look at pages containing the word login, but then you get all these successful logins. And so then you want to remove the ones that were successful somehow. And maybe the status equals 200 for the web login indicates a successful login, so you remove it. But there are other logins like SSH logins, which also contain the string failed login, and you want them, but they don't have a status field. That's where you could get in trouble this way.
Right, so you've missed all those other attempts that were successful or not through some other method.
That's right. That's the problem. That's why this would matter. And that's the problem. You've taken two logs that are not really structured the same and just put them in a big pile. And in fact, in reality, you probably have 100 different logs in a big pile. And that's why they pay us the big bucks. That's why even with Splunk, you have to know what you're doing to get good results, because the underlying log data is kind of confusing. It would be nice if there was like a standard, like a RFC standard for the way to lay out a log and everybody laid them out the same. That would be great. Like there's a bunch of things about the internet, if we could go back and do it over, we could make it a lot better. But it historically evolved. So there's all these old, like Microsoft Office, everything, stored everything in unreadable binary files until 2008, with a different proprietary format for each product. They eventually figured out this is a really bad idea. Now, if you get sued and you have to return all your documents about Java for 7 years, you can't search them because they're in some screwy proprietary format. So in 2008, Microsoft made all Microsoft Office documents plain text XML documents. For this reason, because you have to be able to search through servers full of terabytes of data and find things. But nobody thought of that for decades, you know? And that's the problem. So nobody thought of standardizing the logs. Even today, nobody's even talking about that. That would be great if we just had some standard for logs and everybody said, you must do RFC 5921 title logs or we won't buy your product. That would improve life a lot, but we're not there. So that's the game here. So here's the example. Status not equal 200 gives you 3110 events, but not status equals 200 gives you 66,000 events, because there are a lot of events that don't include the word status, and therefore they satisfy this condition, but they don't satisfy this condition. So,
That is a huge factor.
Yep. All right. And so do they ever yield the same results? And of course they do. If that field is everywhere, like index, then they'll get the same answer, because there are no records that don't have an index. So that's the thing. All right. And there's fast, smart, and verbose. They
Sorry,
make a
Sam,
big,
I
yeah,
don't
yeah.
mean to interrupt you, but
That's
going
fine.
back, the only reason you're pointing this out is because that portion of the query index web supersedes all the stuff we were talking about
Yeah,
before.
that's automatically generated by Splunk, so that's always there. Anything else is not necessarily always there. Yeah, very good. And also time. Time is automatically generated by Splunk. So, right, so there's a fast mode and a smart mode and a verbose mode. The training makes a big deal about this. I really haven't noticed much difference. Different search modes. They talk about use this for one condition, use this for another. In practice, I never worry about this. It doesn't seem to make the huge difference that the Splunk training tells you it's going to make. But anyway.
This is just the difference between like shorthand SQL versus long, writing out
Yeah,
Just the idea is that you're using less processing power or resources.
they pretend it makes a big difference. In practice, I've never had to adjust this. It's I don't know why they get so upset
Falling
about it.
back to your human thing, make it easy for you.
Yeah. And so I guess verbose would probably be easiest, but in practice, I don't notice a big difference between these modes. Anyway, that's it for this lecture, and I'm going to stop this recording.